on up. We're going to head into our teaching time. And at this moment, I'll go ahead and read through our teaching scripture. We're looking at the book of Psalms, chapter 13. And how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me.
This is Kyle, lead pastor here at Generations, and we want to get to know you and your story. It has been such an incredible season to listen to just people around our church answer, how has prayer impacted your life? And we hope that if you feel led to share a response to that, that you do exactly that. Over the next several months, we will shift some of our questions and kind of shift our question to give you an opportunity to respond in a new way and consider how God is at work in your life. You know, it's interesting that the APA actually, American Psychological Association, actually says that at least 60% of people feel overwhelmed in their day-to-day life. The church has every opportunity, the people of God have every opportunity to step into the lives of each other and in of our overwhelmed and anxious world and bring the presence of peace. Specifically, about 46% of that 60-ish or so percent of people who say they feel overwhelmed at all times report that financial stress is the primary cause. So just think about that. If you look to your right and to your left and kind of look around, that someone down that row is feeling financially stressed or overwhelmed. They're quietly carrying the weight of bills, of debt, or maybe even making ends meet. Maybe that someone is you. And that takes the phrase, the struggle is real, to a whole new level. I know what it's felt like at times when you're trying to get a church up and running and try to be a tangible presence and help people who feel overwhelmed and yet feel overwhelmed yourself. I mean, there was a string that you've probably heard me talk about before, and if you haven't, there was about a string of 8 to 9 months where it seemed like everything in our house broke. Whether it was an accident in a car, the HVAC going out in February of the coldest winter we had had in years, and it seemed like just one thing after another, and I just remember being like, God, we're trying to do this thing for you. What is going on? And echo some of the phrase of like, how long, oh Lord, can't we just get on the other side of that? And Ruth and I have had to work through our vocabulary because it's really hard, because it's very easy to say, well, it'll eventually get better. Or in this next season, once this slows down, and you can apply that to financial things, if we can just get over this hump and then it'll all be better. And sometimes it feels, quite frankly, like it never comes. And I know my default is, and maybe yours is too, is just to try to muscle through it, to make a plan, stick to the plan. Can I get everyone on the plan? Work the plan, and then we'll be good. And then the plan doesn't work. And what do we do now? And then even when I make the plan, it's like, if the plan doesn't work out, and then it's like a level of shame and embarrassment that I'm like, I'm supposed to put all these things together and it's supposed to work, and it doesn't quite work. And so maybe you've prayed that prayer, been in that situation where you just kind of like, how long, oh Lord? You know, it's interesting. This is a prayer and this is a phrase that's been echoed in various ways throughout the centuries. I mean, you can go back, and I even think of, is as interesting as I was kind of crafting this together, it was like I had so many different like historical things where it's like great political speakers or politicians or even pastors speaking into cultural moments where they're like where the cry of the people's hearts were how long, oh Lord, and they were coming up for answers, and the wise ones and those who were spiritually in tune actually didn't temper the language. They didn't pull any punches. They identified the brokenness and the messiness and said, this stinks. But I believe that God will see us through. And that's where the Psalms, I think, are helpful for us. They speak into our human experience. And in fact, 40% of the Psalms are actually what we're going to look at today called laments. It's the ability to say, God, this stinks. This is broken. I need you to make it right. I need you to mend it and make it whole. And I think lament as a whole gives us the ability to process pain with God instead of letting it control us. Lament is how I lean on God when life leans hard on me. And we don't do great with lament, if we're honest. Because lament, to us, sometimes is weakness. Lament is a sign of emotional instability. Sometimes even lament in our minds says, yeah, you failed, you screwed up, you didn't prepare as good. But what lament really allows us to do is come before God with what is hard and give it to him, to identify something and turn it over to us. Because life does lean hard on us. And here's what happens. When life leans hard on us and we're feeling the pain and the pressure of the moment, that will escape somewhere. And so the common kind of refrain that I would like us to submit in our minds today is this, that if I don't take my pain to God, my pain will take me somewhere else. I want you to say that with me, actually. If I don't take my pain to God, my pain will take me somewhere else. Say it again one more time. We're going to have a little more interaction today. All right, so I'm going to start it. I want you to say it again with me. If I don't take my pain to God, my pain will take me somewhere else. And so this thing called lament gives us the ability to process pain well. See, lament isn't despair, whining, or weakness. It's faith expressed in honesty. It's the act of taking your grief, frustration, or confusion and bringing it directly to God. Jesus himself, our Savior and our model, lamented. He wept over Jerusalem and the brokenness and the fact that they missed the very presence of God in their midst and would rather cling to something else. He even cried out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" As a form of lament. To basically what we'll work through today is to go from a place of despair and acknowledgement of what is wrong and broken, but ultimately to a place of promise. See, Jesus crying out wasn't weakness. It was trust in the middle of unbearable pain. Jesus shows us that we don't have to pretend like brokenness doesn't exist. Lament is a way to remain dependent and present before God when life is hard. And so David writes Psalm 13. We're not exactly sure when he wrote it, but it's not hard to imagine how these feelings might have been evoked when he was on the run for his life. If you're unfamiliar with David's story, David was one of the youngest brothers in his family and was promised and anointed to be king. But there was this other king, Saul, who was in control and in charge. And ultimately what happened is Saul felt threatened by David. And so David, the promised king, the anointed one of Israel, is on the run for his life. How long, O Lord, should I run? You've promised that I would be king. Why am I running for my life? And in fact, I think oftentimes that at one moment when David was hiding in a cave and Saul was present there right before him. And there in that moment, the how long, O Lord, seems like the precise opportunity to go in and end this suffering. To take matters into his own hands and say, how long, O Lord? I'm waiting a long time. Let me just go end this thing right now. And that's probably, to Victoria's point, would have been the forceful way to do it, rather than to respond in faith and wait for God's timing. So what does David do? Is he comes in and he cuts off Saul's, kind of garment, and he kind of lets him know that, like, I had the opportunity to take your life, but instead I'm going to wait for God to provide. See, David had the habit of choosing lament over control. He learned to take his pain to God instead of letting it guide his actions. Because if I don't take my pain to God, my pain will take me somewhere else. You may take matters into your own hands. So how does David actually use lament to shape his heart? To take itself to God rather than to matters into his own hands. Psalm 13, kind of broken into 3 chunks, begins with acknowledging the pain. He says in verse 1 and 2, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts day after day and have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? You've probably asked those questions yourself in a difficult situation. Are they going to win? Are they going to get the final say? Why do they always badmouth me? Like, when is this person going to get it together, maybe even? Or why does it feel like I'm always on the losing end of this situation, even though I feel like God's best is something different than what's happening? What we see in David is he doesn't sugarcoat his struggle. 4 times he cries, how long? And that's exactly what lament looks like. It's brutally honest about God's seeming absence and our ongoing pain. But it's not complaining. It's faithfulness. Because David doesn't direct his pain or his cries elsewhere. Not even to a trusting friend. Not to a spouse. Not to a Facebook post. He directs his cries to the one who can hear and have compassion. And ultimately provide. That's faithfulness. David gives us permission to tell God exactly how we feel. And then he brings that struggle to God again in verse 3 and 4. So it's not just a one and done thing. It's a repetition. Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fail. Notice the shift. David moves from describing his pain to asking God to act. He's not just venting. He's depending. Instead of taking matters into his own hands, he pleads with God to help on the basis of God's character. See, as we get to know who God is and what he has done, we ultimately get to hold God up to God's standard. God, be true to yourself. If you are faithful, I need you to be faithful and show me what faithfulness looks like. God, if you are just, I need you to be just and show me what your justice is like. God, if you are merciful, I need you to show up and give mercy and allow me to see and perceive it in such a way as that to be the case. See, trust is contrasted with the might of his adversary. And the heart of lament is turning our pain into prayer. Not into ongoing complaint. And in verse 5 and 6, he really anchors this in trust. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praises, for he has been good to me. David's circumstances likely haven't changed. Sometimes when you're crying these prayers out, and that's what they are. Psalms are the prayer books of God's people, and we can leverage them to give us words when we don't feel like we have them, or we want to say something choice and we need the words of God to be saturated in our soul. Sometimes our circumstances don't change, but when we process our pain with God, our heart will change. And so David chooses to trust God's unchanging love even when his situation remains uncertain. And that's how really lament works. It doesn't sugarcoat it. It doesn't pretend like it doesn't exist. It names it, trusts God, and clings to his promises. So that's the simple roadmap. When you're trying to lament or you're trying to work through something, it's not overly complicated. It's name it, ask for help, and choose to trust. Give it to God in those ways. God, I feel this way. Victoria talked about recounting a few weeks ago the specific prayer. That's what this is. It's naming a specific situation, saying, God, I need your help, and then I'm going to trust you and give you the space to work. And we need stories of God's faithfulness because sometimes we doubt his goodness. But that's why sharing these family stories are so incredibly helpful, because while we wait for God to show up, we can know that he is still at work, even when we see that, and when we see that through the lives of others. And so lamenting, learning how to do that well, helps us stay faithful in the waiting. Lament is how I lean on God when life leans hard on me, and it keeps us connected to God instead of running from him. So that roadmap is simple, but it's hard and sometimes it's long. And like any good long trip or any long process, what do we tend to do? We like to look for shortcuts. We try to get around things. And I think in the waiting, there's often two destructive alternatives that we try to circumvent the circumstances of God's timing and provision. And so David could have absolutely killed Saul and taken his throne immediately, but it wouldn't have solved his problem overnight. It probably would have even shattered his soul. And so when we refuse to lament and wait on God, we take shortcuts that seem to work at first. Shortcuts, this notion of this destination, these alternative kind of roadmaps that we take, gives us the illusion of control that ultimately always backfire. You know this to be true if you've been struggling financially. We'll go back to that. And you try to fudge numbers, borrow irresponsibility. It may give you temporary relief, but there's long-term stress because you become enslaved to someone else. If your marriage is in trouble, you might seek emotional connection or pleasure elsewhere, and it feels good, but ultimately destroys trust and erodes connection. If you're struggling with parenting challenges, you try to control everything, but it may even stop the immediate problem. If you grew up in a household where it's like, I'm gonna kind of align you with corporal discipline, and again, I'm not against spanking in any regards, but sometimes the extra control of force as a means of control ultimately damages the soul and well-being of the child and harms the parent-child relationship. So when we try to control everything, even in our parenting, that might cause real challenges later down. Maybe the pain's too much to bear. So what do? We try to binge watch, we scroll, we drink, or maybe even use things to numb our sensations. And that temporary numbing may provide some relief, but it always creates lingering shame and really moves you towards any real solution. Maybe the shortcut is I'm just going to go off on them. I've got this low-grade anger, and I'm just going to let them have it. Maybe it's not explicitly, but it's the small wins, the passive aggressiveness, to lash out at someone, use your words to get what you want and feel better. And so while it may give you temporary power in that situation, the lasting fear that you have that maybe causes that low-grade anger won't go away, and you'll be worried that you'll actually be found to be weak. Shortcuts offer illusionary control for a season, but they always backfire because they're built on our wisdom instead of God's. They chip away at our integrity and our ability to trust God with future problems. The second path that we try to go through is usually bitterness. So shortcuts and bitterness. This is equally dangerous. When we stop lamenting, we stop praying, and we start thinking, God doesn't care, so I'll just handle everything myself. And this looks more spiritual than taking shortcuts, but it's equally destructive. Bitterness supplants God as the true judge of good and evil, and it supplants it with self, where our righteous judgment is the sole determinant of what's truly right and wrong. I've watched people get bitter after job loss, infertility, the death of a loved one. And what happens is they let it fester because they never express it through lament. And as it festers, it becomes poison in the soul. And they start looking at people as the enemy, rather than as a source of healing guide who will weep with them when they are sad and rejoice when breakthrough happens as well. So they stop gathering, they stop praying, they stop believing God is good, and in turn believe everything is always a lesson. And they let that fester and eat away at their soul. They become cynical about everything, even other people's joy, God's promises, and life itself. And what happens is they think this is more spiritual because it's like, oh, I'm protecting myself from other disappointments. And yes, bitterness does protect you from hope, from joy, and from intimacy with God and others. And you won't be disappointed again because you won't expect anything good, but you also won't experience the fullness of life that God has for you. The bitter person may seem more realistic, but they've actually lost touch with reality. And they can't even see God's faithfulness even when it's right in front of them. Their adult children love them, but all they see is that they're doing wrong. They have some form of health, a home, and food, but all they focus on is what they've lost. You've probably experienced seasons like that, and you know people in your life where it's like, man, look at some of the good that's there. And all they can see is the pain, because the way they've processed the pain is not with God through lament. And so whether we take shortcuts or become bitter, both paths leave us more isolated, more anxious, and further from God than where we started. And David could have taken either path possibly in that cave. He could have killed Saul and seized control, or he could have become bitter and given up on God's promise entirely. Instead, he chose that third way, lament, and it changed everything. Lament stops shortcuts by sending us straight to the source. Lament stops bitterness by reminding us of the grace that was shown to us even when it hurts. Lament acknowledges the polluting effects of sin while not perpetuating more sinful pollution. You've probably heard the saying, hurt people hurt people. But hurt people don't have to hurt people when we learn to lament. And if the church embraces lament together, in a culture obsessed with spin, polish, and pretending that everything's fine, lament would make us more countercultural, because we'd be able to call evil evil and grieve over it. And we'd be able to see good as good and celebrate together. And we'd be able to listen and respond to the Spirit and be a community of people that turns despair and difficulty into a culture of reminding each other of God's promises and of His faithfulness. That's why we need to know each other's stories. Because sometimes you're going to be weak again. In fact, you probably will, and you'll be like, man, where is God in this? And you need someone who knows your story and can say, hey, what God did for you then, he'll do it again. And we got to know each other on that deep way to be able to speak that truth to each other and remind each other. So we must be able to take our pain to God. So let's say that again together. If I don't take my pain to God, my pain will take me somewhere else. Take your pain to God. Take your pain to God. Let me leave you where David's journey ends and where's our can too. It ends with, I will sing. That journey of lament takes us from raw pain to real hope. Lament is not weakness. It's faith in action. It's bringing our honest cries to God and saying, Lord, I need you to work. Instead of hiding or pretending, you're saying, Lord, I trust you enough to meet me here. And he does meet you there. And he's proved it. And even if you felt like, I've never seen God's faithfulness in my life, he was faithful because he sent Jesus. And said, you're loved and not alone, and I want a relationship with you. That is the hope of the cross and the hope of the resurrection, is that you can be made new, be known, and be forever with God. That you are loved and you are cherished, and your story matters. And your pain can have purpose. And his pain redeems us and our pain. And so process our pain with God, or you'll do it somewhere else.